Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you something about what I was writing today. And that worked in regard to panic. So a lot of people, they have the panics, and I've been there as well. It's really annoying. In fact, I know that when I was in other jobs, I kind of dealt with it a little bit more extremely, and so I've got a thing to talk about in reference to that. So here's this article I wrote. I think the trouble that people are wondering about in the case of people eyeing their P&L while trading is something of a dream catcher problem. Okay, so dream catchers are basically like there's various I guess I forget what the name of them are, but basically humankind is kind of plagued by bad thoughts that lead to bad emotions as well, or bad moods. And so it's an ancient technique that you basically find somebody that kind of knows about it and talks about it and basically uses a dream catcher. Now, it can be a technique. I know the American native tribes, they use an actual symbol called a dream catcher, and they hang those in their cars and so forth, in their house, etc. Basically, it just catches negative. It's a symbol of catching negative spirit, or it reminds you to filter your spirit out of negative things. Now, spirit is, the translation of psychology that the world is still using and has used for 10,000 years or more. That is something that I've seen many traders need. They need that, but it's really just a matter of being new. And so eventually they'll just build in to themselves their own dream catchers to filter out this panic-ridden information or data or situation. Now, when I say information, that's something that I study in research, and information is on everything. Everything that's going into your eyes and your ears is being processed. It's all information being processed into other forms of information, and everything going through the internet is information being transformed from one form to another. Actually, everything is information when you break it down. Empires are based on information. You can't have an empire without information. If you remove the information, as in there's no ideology, there's no such thing as civilization in the first place. So you've got to have information. It's just intrinsic to everything. Whether you're talking quantum theory or basic physics or information technology, etc., etc., etc. Blueprints, spec sheets, laws, belief systems, right? Same things. Anyway, so I go on. I know what you mean by filtering out that kind of information from your thought processes, but really it's training your thought processes to filter out the emotion that can misconstrue your thought processes, which lead to faulty execution of entry and exit stratagem. I try to keep the spirit inside of trainees as full and robust as possible in everything I train people to operate a tiny piece of data should never become something that is powerfully overwhelming, per the spirit strata of that entire cyborg mechanical operation in which the spirit is the trainee, is only one component of the overall machine that is engaged on the big job. So now we're talking about trading here, but this is one job occupation. It's not the only job occupation. So, if I were training people to operate machinery, heavy machinery, doing high risk jobs of any kind, a lot of times nerves are part of it. And, it's like I've trained a lot of people, and I noticed that people are extra nervous at first when they're learning the technique of something new, because the big picture is not in them yet, and they need to get to the level where it's second nature. It's actually part of their lifestyle. It's part of how they see the world when they're in action. But at first, it's not, and it's extremely unfamiliar to them. And what always happens, I noticed in myself at first, and then I noticed in everybody else, is that while they're trying to do something new, they're trying to picture all of these, concepts. They're trying to picture the concepts one at a time. And so their imagination, the whole paradigm, like if your mind was basically like this big computer plasma screen, right? And so all the information that's being put out there, you can see in your imagination, basically, right? Or your mental vision, or in your spirit, okay? And basically, if you're trying to piece these things together still, and you're trying to understand them, you're kind of like rolling these things around in kind of a cubicle form. You're trying to feel them out inside of yourself and your spirit there, and basically see the other sides, the tops, the bottoms, and all that, and see how they interact with each other. And then basically, when you've got a good fit, they just kind of stick there naturally, and that's how you learn how to do anything new. And the thing is, though, is once it starts, basically these concepts, once they start to link together in basically a chain, they form, they go from minor concepts, multiple ones, into major concepts, and then into a complete understanding, right? Which could be an ideology or a paradigmatic perception of the world. Okay, and but it all starts out as basic informational elements that lead into basic concepts that lead into major concepts, and it's kind of a basically a pecking order, or maybe a hierarchy of levels or echelons of the information, and the way the information interacts in your spirit. And I use spirit because it's a much more attractive way to build the house within somebody, rather than giving it that kind of cold communistic psychology. If you study information and civilization as much as me, after a while you just realize that the thing that everybody's dealing with now in this era with psychology, okay, is a really cold, bland, communistic kind of architecture. It's just, it doesn't really give anybody anything to be like. Have you ever compared communistic architecture to Renaissance architecture? The old ancient architecture, or recent European architecture, or even recent Chinese architecture or Japanese architecture hundreds of years ago. Right? When you see it, right, it's just, that people that were walking around that stuff for ages they felt like they were more because they were witnessing these things, right? It resembles, it basically refers to them as being something greater than what they had realized before, and that's what they like. Whereas if you just put a cold, block of communist bricks and blocks, right, on top of each other, and then paint it gray or green or whatever, it doesn't do anything for anybody any different than before, and probably even worse, right? So that's why I use the spirit reference rather than the mind reference, or the psychology reference, or the psyche reference. So basically, if you're learning, your mind is full of learning. It's not full of what you're actually doing. You're not aware of what you're actually doing. You're actually introverted in your mind, and you're not actually looking out at what's happening. You got to look at what's happening and then react to what's happening. But in order to get to that stage, first you've got to build the bigger picture inside of your head. Now, depending on what kind of job you're doing, that determines how long it's going to take to induct this thing into you. So basically, you're uploading a bunch of data to formulate a real nice, clear paradigm there in your spirit to be able to be perceptive of what's going on. It's like learning a new language. When you're around a new country of people, you don't have the paradigm. See, it just sounds like a bunch of gibberish. But then as you start to induct all of the cues, the signals, the bells, the whistles, right? Then all of a sudden it's like you're in kind of like a chime box, right? A tunnel of vision. Suddenly, like just a whole door opens to a whole world that was just a bunch of gibberish a couple years ago, right? Now, it's the same with anything you do, whether it's athletic, musical, scientific, engineering, any kind of job, all that stuff. So it's typical. And generally, the more that you get paid doing it, the longer it takes, the more intricate and complex it's going to be. So, So basically, if you picture all these jobs that I've trained people to do, basically they're in this big situation, and they're using their senses, they're using their body and their mind, and then there's that one component. It's the emotive component. It basically, it's where you get the whibber jibbers, and that actually attacks all of the rest of that data processing that you need to do. That's key. That's vital, right? If all of that stuff is altered by that emotive bombardment of panic, or maybe just too much excitement, perhaps, or total fear, then the problem is that the reactions are going to be really bad. And in a risk management situation, right, as a job, that's terrible, because you're going to be losing tons of money, right? Because you're going to output inaccurate execution, and therefore you're risky. You are the risk. In the whole operation, it's very mechanical, very machine-like, but then there's that one catch, right? And so we learn how to control that. In fact, they train Navy SEALs how to control that. And I forget what it is, but basically you kind of think of it like you keep kind of like a rock on top of it. if you basically you get to the point where if you lift the rock up, it comes out and it takes over. And if you keep the rock down, you just don't let it lift up, you can gain this kind of control. And so then you don't ever have that overwhelming kind of fear or panic, that kind of thing. But the thing is, though, is it's also energy. So you can actually control it or throttle it so that it's fueling you and giving you energy. And it kind of makes things more exciting, but also it keeps you kind of motivated and aware, right? Without getting carried away. After a while, it just becomes something that is second nature and accessible to you. But it takes, you've got to practice something that's actually risky, and you got to do it all the time. I mean, it's got to be a lifestyle. In risk management, in various occupations, I learned that that's the worst enemy of all, and keeping the spirits up so that their soul foot is much broader and heavier than tiny prickly little pieces of data information flowing into their eyes and ears. If your soul has bug feet, then the data showing risk in your risk management job, whatever it might be, is as big or bigger than your soul's bug feet. That's why you become overpowered, and then the whole operation is flawed because of that single trivial component. So try to imagine basically somebody who's very experienced at the job that they're doing, such as trading, and basically they've seen the markets day in and out, like all day, every day of the year for a couple years in various markets. And they've done a lot of research, so they figured out, all of the different classes of people, types of people that with the different interests and styles of things behind the actual charts, so they know the crowd pretty well. They just kind of research it up, and they've got a feel for all that, right? So basically, their paradigm is very authentic and genuine and textured and topographic. And it's broad spanning. Whereas the new person that comes in, it's very narrow, right? It's not even tangible, and you can easily get swept off the branch that you're on because you're basically like you've got little tiny bug feet, right? But if you've got big raptor claws or big monkey paws, and you're holding on, it's very hard for the wind to blow you off. So you can stay like a rock up there and just go with the waving branches and that kind of thing, and kind of like a cowboy that rides the Broncos, right? They have to go with the flow of that Bronco, as it's bucking up and down, back and forth, in order to stay on the thing. If they get out of rhythm, then they fly off the thing. So, but it's the same thing there. They're so experienced in 3D physical stuff that this comes natural to them, and so they have that bigger soul foot for that kind of thing, right? And they don't have little tiny bug feet, and then they just blow off because they don't know how to control. They don't speak the language of physical risk assessment, limitation assessment, and then logical procedure execution physically with their body, right? I mean, that's all stuff that's part of athleticism. Okay, whereas what we're doing is much more economical, right? Economical. It has to do a lot with civilization, and in fact, and I try to steer people away from just looking at these charts like they are some kind of calculator, and look at this thing as a market. It's a crowd of people. This is civilization, okay? And you're in this big meeting. You got to translate, everybody's language into your language through the chart. It's like learning sign language. At first, you can't know anybody that speaks sign language, right? Until you actually learn how to speak sign language, and then you can get to know people, right? but there's no, the distance between you and them is infinity until you actually learn that language. So sociological thing that you're trying to get to, and basically, when we're learning all of the levels, the support levels, the resistance levels, the trend lines, the pullbacks, the flags, the pennants, the double tops, the double bottoms, the cup and handle, the head and shoulders, the doji, those kinds of things, right? The 200-day moving average, etc., etc. So basically, when you're learning all those things, that's the language, okay? And then you're seeing basically how the chart, the price, and the price patterns in the candlestick bars are relating to those signs, those technical analysis signs, like the levels and stuff like that, right? And then that's how you interpret what is going on in this big sociological meeting that's taking place here every day around the clock, basically, in these markets. And when you learn all that stuff, okay, it just becomes routine. Like, you're a part of the country, right? You're an actual speaking, interacting part of the country, right? I mean, it's a level, right, where you lose some, but it's never ever more than what you make. Like, you're an actual productive worker in this industry, right? You're a viable worker in it. I mean, you're part of this kind of country, and you speak a language that only these people speak. Okay, it really happens. But the thing is, though, is that when you get to that level, like I said, you've got that big spirit foot or that big soul foot. So when you step on these little risky data, the little riskies, right? It's just data, right? It's just information passing through your eyes. Okay, but when you step on those little riskies, those little prickly data points, okay, flowing in as it's flowing in, okay, it's not paining your foot. It doesn't cause any panic or anything, because you already know the outcomes. You already know all the possibilities, and you know the options for every single possibility. You've worked it out, right? It's partially arithmetic and kind of a budgeting, cost cutting, raising money to pay for the costs that basically costs something like, it's a risk, right? I mean, that's what it is. Cost is the risk. The risk of every trade is losing money. That's the cost. So you got to realize that you got to find ways of cutting cost, one, and then two, raising cash via strategies to pay for that cost. Okay. And so no matter what hand, what cards are laid down on the poker table and what cards you get dealt, you always know what to do. You've always got a reference. You know what kind of people are at the table depending on the day, depending on the market. You're comfortable in your setting. So that's when the panic is no more. But the only way to get there is sticking to itness. You've got to constantly practice. I recommend wrecking all the time, in sim, not in real money. And so you really get a feel for total damage and total destruction. So then you really know where your limitations are, okay, where it's going to start costing you, and then you can start working on that cost and stuff. But basically, if you know exactly where the wall is on the racetrack, you know exactly how much room you've got before you start getting into that danger zone, right? So then you develop not only the wall, the perception of the wall, which is that deep cutting cost that everybody knows about in trading, right? But you've also got a buffer, a limit zone, when you know you're getting too close to it, right? And it's not a matter of panic, it's just a matter of logic, right? I mean, try to think about the first time you were driving. Yeah, it was a little panicky, right? You was like a little bug in the emotional wind inside of you, right? It's just spirit, guys. Your spirit, your thinking spirit, right? So, and yeah, it's a real thing. It's a phenomenon. It's inside of everybody. And so, the Riskies are getting to you, getting the wibber jibbers, all right? But then now you're a driver, right? I mean, you've been driving for years probably now. And you don't panic or anything. You just pay attention to the road, and then you know all the possibilities. For instance, when you get into an intersection, you know all the possibilities. And so for each of those possibilities, you have a kind of reaction that you can do in order to avoid danger or mitigate danger or destruction or damage and that kind of thing, right? So, but at first you was just trying to like think about the gas and the brake and the gears and the blinkers and the lights and stuff and like how close are you to the outside outside of the road, how close are you to the inside of the road, are you getting too close to oncoming traffic, are you close enough to the curb when you're parking or too close and that kind of thing. But then after a while it's just you don't even think about the pedals. You don't think about that blinker or anything like that. All of that stuff is just in the back of your mind, and all you're doing is paying attention to any oncoming data outside of those windows. And that's how trading's going to be. That's how anything is going to be, whether it's sports, musicianship, high-risk jobs like steel workers that climb on the steel beams, any kind of machine operating, that kind of thing. Basically, it just... your spirit is just like a big window into the world, and you're a functioning component in that world. That world functions by your spirit, and that's how the world works after you get done with all of your homework. Right? And you've grown that inside of you into a broad, thick soul, encompassing foot. The big picture. Alright, to go on, I have learned that simply the fact that people are so moved as in their bowels are moving in the midst of the risk that the invaluable info through the eyes and ears are providing means they are sensitive enough to see the bigger picture eventually and function as a living part or extension of it. In other words, you are sensitive enough to flow with the information once you have learned your occupational field. The only reason you do not flow with the information is because you don't know the big picture of the occupation you're participating in. You have to induct that into your spirit. Think about it like a dog or a bird rolling in the dirt, dusting themselves, trying to get as fully covered and messed in that dirt as possible. In this case, rather than dust, it's information through experience, experiments, and research, all for free online, that you have to keep rolling in to dust your soul. So the big picture is as much a part of your soul as anything else in your life is. They don't pay you for nothing in this industry. You have to earn your keep, while the rest do indeed sleep. Okay, so basically, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. I'll go on. By the way, bowels is the area within you, is a reference to the spirit phenomenon within you. Okay, so basically, they used to refer to your bowels as the basically like your guts, right? Or your innards. That's your bowels, right? And so whatever it is that's thinking and feeling and envisioning in there and actually seeing and hearing and all that, right? That's your bowels. That's your bowel area, right? And so that's not important here. I was just making sure that I was clear about that when I referenced that, because I know the first time that I heard that, that's not what I was thinking until until I put two and two together. I used to be a tree climber. I'm going on here. I used to be a tree climber as a business owner. I loved the climbing, freedom, manhood, and excitement. I was a bodybuilder shooting for the minor leagues previously. In my first year, I was in these trees only 40 foot in the air, standing on climbing spikes pricked into the trunk with a steel core rope that wrapped around the back of the trunk, both ends clipped into my climbing saddle, and all my body could do was shake like jello in the trees, in the knees and elbows. The fact I were in a tree was not the big deal. That was amazing. But what also was amazing was the fact that my whole body was reacting the way it was. Weak in the knees was the least you could say about it. Total jello. I had to get these jobs done within a certain amount of time because I had bid them for that amount of time. To take longer would cost me money, and I had to have the price competitive enough because of reasons I won't say why. It was a few years later that I had forgotten all about those days because I was working 80 hours a week, day in and out, all 7 days a week. I finally realized that when I climbed the trees, I was like walking on the floor of a tall building. You know how that feels. You just pay attention to everything except the heights. And that's how I work. I paid nothing to the fact that I was so high off the ground, but really I just didn't feel the risk like before, because I knew I managed the risk fully and thoroughly, 100% with my climbing and rigging equipment. It was still exciting though. So when I were jello in the trees, I learned that if I became very pissed off, I could change all of that jello into cool working cucumbers. Naturally, if jello arms and legs was holding up the work and the profits, and I were an avid athlete previously, then you know how pissed off I were at my body. But that's what stopped the problem. Right? So basically what stopped the problem was I was so pissed that I couldn't get everything to work right in order to get the job done. Okay? And that I found out serendipitously. So I go on. Well, it is true that I became like a tenacious, short-tempered mountain lion with other virtues as a result of that job. The one thing I can tell you, though, for sure, is that when I was very knowledgeable about all of the possibilities in the climbing and rigging experience, and I had all of the right safety and rigging equipment under my belt, I feared nothing. Once I started to fear nothing, I could just do my job, and my spirit became robust, like the Bigfoot analogy I explained above. And so that is basically where I was always taking my trainees, whether in anything that I was training people for, was basically step by step, basically unloading all of the concepts and the reference words on them at one time in one big block and just overwhelm them so they're swimming in this stuff. They're not going to remember any of it. Right, but basically I know what I'm doing. I'm listing everything inside of their mind there, and then the next time Right. Now they're practicing these things, and I know that their imagination is full of trying to imagine these things and not actually paying attention to what they're actually doing. The next time I go through all of that list of concepts and reference words, now they're starting to form bigger concepts, right? The smaller concepts and words form bigger concepts and basically separate bigger pictures. Okay, so it's starting to work, and they're basically, it's linking together in what they are doing. So the picture is becoming clear, the bigger picture is almost there. The third time I run down through all of those reference words and all of those concepts again, okay, now I'm knowing that they're actually going to see the bigger picture, so I can actually go up a little bit higher in what they can understand. And so that is that. By then, they're so familiar with the words and the concepts, and they link them all together, that as I go through them again and explain the bigger picture, it all just makes sense, right? And so, and then, it's not much longer after that that basically they can just drive. They don't have to pay attention to like all the little intricate things. It's just a job, right? A job that makes good money. Okay, so the conclusion here, once you are very familiar with the market because you've been trading all days and trading all nights overnight in various markets while researching who or what is behind those charts in the various business seasons, then you've seen it all. You know what the market does, what it does, what it doesn't do, and you know everyone else is thinking about what everyone else is thinking about in regards to it. You've thought about it all. Then it's just your office there, and you don't freak out because you know what to expect, and you have all of the equipment under your belt, right? So basically, I mean, if it's just routine enough, right, there's nothing, it's not a big deal anymore. When you transition from like elementary school to the bigger school, or from high school to college, right, it was kind of you kind of had the wibber jibbers maybe. You were anticipating things being too much, but once you got into the routine, it was just, you were just fitting into your office. Basically what you were doing. Equipment under your belt in this case is just a reference to all of the arithmetic strategies that you use to pay for your cost of each trade before that loss is realized, shrinking the cost of risk, and a quasi form of budgeting work which can be pretty tedious. Then there is the basics as far as what can the market do and not do when the patterns on the chart are showing what the crowd behind the charts are doing and thinking. So basically, it's kind of like the one-legged duck, two-legged duck analogy. So you know how to enter trades and how to take money, right? That you can do. So basically that's your one-legged duck. And you know that if that's all you know, then all you do is you swim in a circle, right? Because everything that you make, you lose. And then you probably lose more, right? But it's basically the same way when you're living at home and you know how to work and take money, and then you know how to spend money. But do you know how to work, take money, and in the same day do something that you're going to invest yourself into that in the future will start to pay you separate from your work that you're interested in? as well as look, budget, do budgeting techniques to cut down your costs. Look for better deals, buy used, do whatever you got to do to get all your costs down. Hell, use coupons, rebates, that kind of thing. Find sales, wait for sales, that kind of thing. Okay, and but all of those things, especially the one where you're making money on the side, right? Doing something that you're interested in, and then paying for your costs of living, right? So if you can just get the cost of your living down, okay, first, and then you can actually pay for the cost of living on the side, then that job that you're doing is building capital. And then later on, that capital is going to be investable in things that can either save you a ton of money or can give you a residual income, right? A return on investment, okay? Which builds that savings even more, even faster, okay? Right? So that's just the two-legged duck analogy and just practical living. And when it comes to trading, it's the same thing. Now, you may not have ever thought about it like that if you're fairly new, okay? But I'll tell you, there is no, there is no pro in this industry that does not know that. And the nice thing about it is that once you get it, basically you just apply that to your average, everyday situation in your personal life. Just carries on. And then it really applies to everything else. I mean, when I was a tree climber and everything else, that's what it was all about. It wasn't just doing, going forward. It was anticipating every single possible risk and then having multiple solutions to all of them. All right? As well as all of the business side of things. All right? So many different things there, but mostly the risk. Why? Because I was slinging wood, big chunks of wood, over people's property, sometimes over their heads, over their cars and the power lines and that kind of thing. So, if I didn't see it, like I couldn't picture what was going on, there was something amiss, then I couldn't go forward. Right? I have to know every single thing. I got to run through every single thing, and I have to be fast. It's got to be fast because money is time, right? And risk, right? Cost of risk is huge. If you blow it big, then it's pretty bad. But basically, I think I can cut this thing short because I think basically the point is explained here. Okay, so the bottom line is just keep hammering away, testing the strategies, and even completely wrecking the strategies in sim. Use as many hours a day, week, and year to get this part of the job out of the way already. You really gotta just ball yourself up, lock yourself in, and throw yourself into that web until you got it. Be merciless to yourself. And when you start thinking or feeling like you deserve better, then work so hard you catch that dream just by reoccupying your whole spirit with your work, right? So back to that dream catching concept. So, where the Navy SEALs, they've got that dream catcher, right? And so does everybody else out here in the real world, okay? And they're able to control that rock. They can throttle it. It's like a fuel throttle, okay? And basically that's that dream. That dream, if you let it go and it gets out of control and you can't control it at all, it's a nightmare, right? And then you can't do anything because you're frozen in the headlights. You just can't compute anything. It's like, remember, I was in that tree when I first started doing the job, and I was turning into jello, and I was just, what the hell is this? I was pissed. I'm not being pissed, but I was pissed then. Okay. But then that's kind of how I gradually learned how to throttle the thing. But it really was just that's what got me through in the meantime until I was very familiar with all of the different, things up there. And then it was just simple. It just was something that I couldn't believe how simple the stuff was until I put a trainee up there. Then I realized how complex all this stuff was. And it's the same with trading. I mean, it's unbelievably simple eventually, but then when you start to train somebody, it's unbelievably complex. But I'll tell you, it's not as complex as being a lawyer or a doctor. I'll give you that much. Or chemist, okay? And yet, you're going to make more. I mean, if you want to, you can make more. If you don't want to, you can make less. It's up to you, but... Okay, so lots of practice every day. I learned on ES because it is the most widely reported and trader investor known market in the world, which made the soul of this market transparent. So basically I can see, into the market because I can see so much news and information and traders that are so familiar with it, talking about order flow, talking about economics reports, talking about rates, talking about the global economic system, the political economic system. I do tons of independent news research, and I keep up with some mainstream research on CNBC, as well as the traders and so forth in the web. Right. So, and then plenty of practice in these markets. Wrecking it. I don't wreck it so much anymore. But in the past, that's what I was just doing. I was just wrecking the trades until, it wasn't like I was going to get it in a couple of months. It took a very long time. But practice hammering it. And eventually the charts talk to you and it tells you basically what the crowd is doing. And then it's just, it's like you're a good business person, right? Or a good artist, a concert person, or that kind of thing. And then you just know what people want. That's the thing. And that's the trait of a good broker of talent and retail and capital, right? And law, right? Or orders, right? Orders and strategy, which apply to police, law enforcement, and military, that kind of thing. But basically, all that stuff, basically it just... I lost my train of thought there. I wanted to be able to see this market so clearly all of the way to the executions. Okay, yeah. So basically, being able to understand what people want and need is key to saving money. Because if you can't see what is the issue at hand with the people that you're being a aid to, then you're going to get a lot of costs. If you're buying things that aren't selling, for instance, in your store, now you're losing a bunch of money because you're buying things that aren't selling. So you got all this inventory, all your equities locked up in inventory that's just sitting there, instead of your equity or your capital in things that actually would be selling and turning a profit, right? You got to constantly flip that inventory. That's what it's all about. But if you can't hear the crowd, the market out there, then there's not much hope. And so that's where you've got to get in this market, okay? To where you can hear the crowd. So that's just practicing the market all the time, day and night. Get it in your blood and research. Follow independent conservative news online. right? And also follow, I would suggest CNBC, which appears better than, definitely better than Bloomberg and what's another one? Bloomberg, but and CNN Money. Fox Business, though, I like Bartiromo. She's pretty good. Like a straightforward, factual person, right? Somebody that's critical of liars and exaggerators and that kind of thing, right? That's the kind of reporting that I look for, or news anchors that I look for. Otherwise, I just throw them all in the garbage, right? It's probably about, out of all the journalists out there, there's probably about, I would say, 5% are objective thinkers and only stick to, critical, intrinsic facts that actually matter, right? Because they're good at understanding the people, and they're also good at understanding this area of study. So they can broker all that stuff to these viewers and readers better than anybody else. And that's just, that's the fast. That's actually the only way to understand who's behind the market. Because, if you're going, well, those just seem like really plain old older dudes or something like that, or those are like the dried up white guys or something, well, maybe, I don't know. But the thing is, though, is you've got to find people that are passionately expert in these things, right? The ones that have put this whole area of study of economics and investing in their blood for 20 or more years, and they've been a great success, one of the greater successes out there, and they're willing to teach you, right? And they're not sheltered, right? They're as red-blooded as can be. At the same time, that combination of character is very hard to find. Okay? It's just rare. So it's only like 5% of reporters out there, but when you get them, that's your pulse. You're reading the pulse on everything. Okay? Now, I admit, it's like that on CNBC. Like 5%, 5% of the people that come on there, and the actual staff of CNBC are logical, straight shooters, and then the rest of them, they're just whatever. They're just whatever the boss said, and they really, they're just doing a job. This is not their passion. Okay, they don't have experience. They really just don't have experience in this stuff. It's just they're reporting it. That's about the best you can get out of them. And so, lying or exaggerating for entertainment on the TV, that means nothing to them, right? So those are people that you want to listen to, And then there's a lot of people that haven't been trading or investing over 20 years, right, with great successes, okay, that come onto the show and then they talk about everything. You can't follow them. That's not the ones you got to follow. So it's, it's just, you cut out about 95% of them. But it takes a while to basically understand what they're talking about in the first place. So at first, you got to listen to them all, right? And then after a while, after you learn the system, you see the system and how it mechanically works, okay? And then you can read between the lines when they're referring to everything, and then you can see where they don't have a clue, right? They either don't have a clue or they're actually lying, because you can see how objectively dishonest or inaccurate they are, right? Okay, so let's see here. When it does obey, let's see. Okay, so here we go. And when the market doesn't obey the levels, right, it means one thing. When it does obey them, it means another thing. When the market has obeyed the levels right 2 or 3 times in a row, then people have made money, and it'll stop obeying the levels because we poker players have just won the ante, and we have moved on to another table or another day. So another table is a reference to another market, right? So basically when the chart's set up and then it made a bunch of money, and everybody made a bunch of money. Now that chart is basically shot out until it resets up again, if it even resets up again. And so you go to the next market and you see if there's anything setting up or anything else going on, because you don't want to sit there and give it all back to the same market. And that's how it would be in like a poker hall. Okay. Or you just say, all right, that's good enough for today. I mean, I didn't mean to make this an entire day or anything. I'm going to go try other things. I already made my pay, right? I'll come back another day. You know, and the same works for losing. You got to set a limit. And basically, when you're having a bad day, it just means that whatever it is about that day is different than the other days, okay? And so you're out of rhythm with whatever's going on because you're in the rhythm of what generally goes on. All right? So you got to put a limit. Otherwise, you'll just keep trying and trying. Now, I'm talking about with real money. If you're using sim, just keep on wrecking. Okay? Just keep on wrecking because you got a lot more practice, right? But if you're using real, then you got to have a limit, because basically once you hit that limit, then you just get out and you come back another day, right? When everything's working the general way that it works. Now, eventually that's going to be how it is for you. Probably after about 2 years. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on your experience in the past. But you don't want to, you don't want to be in a bad day when everything's just not right. You know, there's such a thing. Everybody's just out of rhythm. The charts are not behaving right. They're crazy, right? You know, the signal is go one way, okay, but it goes the other way, right? And it does this multiple times. Well, that's going to rack up the cost really, really badly. Okay, so just get out of it, right? Or go have a break and come back and see if there's anything setting up. Sometimes that's the case. So you can pay for those costs, that's your losses, in the same day, or you get them paid for the next day and hopefully a little bit of profit. But you don't want to keep wrecking yourself in a bad market, because no matter what you do, it's just not going to pay you that day. And so if you just keep on wrecking yourself, and you're working for a firm, then basically you're going to blow the count up, right? They're going to lock you down, or you come back the next day and you're working on that cost to pay off that whole day, that bad day. And then you're probably coming back the next day to pay off that cost, right? So it's going to take you 2 days to cover one day's costs. So these are serious things that you've got to think about. This is a business that you've got to run. Okay. Okay, and so, in reference to that poker table scenario, it's just that full reality, right? But if you haven't done the time and you have paid your dues, then you've got tiny little bug feet. Oh, and you haven't paid your dues, then you have the tiny little bug feet, so that gust inside of your soul will knock your concentration right off the branch you're sitting on. When and if it does, just kill the trade, unless you are in training. If you are in sim training, then just keep wrecking it. But basically, you'll know when your mind is haywire, right? Like, it's happened before. After a long time, it'll never go, okay? But when you're intermediate, okay, you're pretty good for most of the time, and then I don't know what it is, but that one day it gets you again, right? Like the heat is on, okay? And that's basically when you know, have you ever heard of a whiteout? It's when you're way up north in like Nunavut territory above Canada, or Siberia, right? And basically you drive down the road and then a storm comes along and you can't even see the road in front of you, right? So you can't drive. If you keep driving, you're going to wind up wrecking in the ditch or something. So what you do is you just stop and wait it out, right? Or if you can see anything, I mean, at all, maybe you just creep along very slowly. But you've got to reduce risk all the way down. And it's the same way in trading. When you white out, you've got to get out. If you don't remember what the trade, like if you got distracted and you came back and you lost where you were in that trading pattern, you don't have any answer, right, about what you're going to do, actually what has taken place. So you basically aren't in rhythm with the song that's going on, with the team. That's the team behind there, right? You forgot where you are. Just get out. Just get out, or tighten up your stop real tight, and then just say, well, if it hits it, then it hits it. If it don't, then it don't. Okay. But if you can't see in front of you what the next steps are, you've got to have also hindsight in order to see in front of you, right? That's just how this works. It's a very, very mental job, and so if you don't have any hindsight, and even if you don't have any hindsight and you don't have any foresight, geez, because, you know, maybe you're panicking or something, which happens to a lot of people. I hear so many people complaining about that, and they just want the solutions. But really, it's just that they're not paying their dues. They just have not put in the time. It's going to take a couple of years to do this. You literally have to codify a whole new paradigm and lifestyle, way of thinking, and language, and social movement, right, for a whole industry, okay, a whole world, right, literally, into your soul, into your spirit, until it's second nature. And you're driving down this abstract imagination road, right? I mean, that's really what it is. And it's a unique experience, and, you know, it pays well once you get it. But as far as blowing around and panicking and that kind of thing inside yourself, it's just a lack of experience. You just have tiny little understanding of the field. You're not researching enough. You're not studying who are pit traders, who are prop firm traders, who are day traders, who are hedge funds. How do they operate? Do they use algos? Do they use floors covered with a lot of traders on the computers and that kind of thing? Do they use both? What is going on behind these things? Who are market makers? How do exchanges work? How do brokers work? What are they paying attention to? I mean, what tells them to put money in or pull money out? Figure all these things out. Okay? And then you're really understanding who is doing what back there, right? Then you can see where things are going. And once you can do that, you know when to get out of the way, and you know when to, you know, make a few extra bucks while you're in one trade, but you're waiting for that trade, but the market's doing something else, so you make a few extra bucks to cover any costs on a loss on the other trade in case. You'll come up with all kinds of strategies if you just keep on working. You got to work hard. Look, this kind of stuff, if you want to make good money, it's for the ambitious. It's not for the greats, because we're the ones that actually facilitate the capital to the greats, right? Nobody's going to remember you for being like a really great financial person. They just won't. It's not that kind of thing. Okay. But whoever we're facilitating, they might be remembered, you know. So that's how it works. But you definitely have to be ambitious, okay? You got to work hard. You got to want to work. This is not a vacation. This is not a resort. This is not Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? Okay, so then here's the last lines here. Wreck as much as possible until sim money losses start to scare you. Ha ha ha. Then you know just where the invisible walls are around the NASCAR tracks until you can feel them in anticipation. You won't anticipate them until you've wrecked into them all year. They are not real in your mind. And so that's the last of what I've got to tell you about this stuff today. Good luck.